on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. It caused some damage, but no casualties. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran has not asked for a ceasefire with America and Israel. Abbas Araghchi told CBS News that Iran was ready to defend itself for as long as it takes. His comments follow an earlier claim by Donald Trump, who said the Iranian government appeared ready to make a deal, but in his words, the terms were not good enough yet. Let's focus first on the military campaign, because Israel says it's expanding the scope of its strikes on Iran, targeting what it calls regime infrastructure. An IDF spokesman said the Israeli military had plans for at least 3 more weeks of the campaign, with thousands of targets that could still be hit. In Israel, emergency services say several people have been injured following Iranian strikes. A missile armed with cluster munitions hit a residential area near Tel Aviv, causing damage but no casualties. Our Middle East correspondent John Donnison arrived there shortly after the strike.
Right, you can see here we're just on the outskirts of Tel Aviv, and just as we were driving in, the sirens went off, and you can see here where we've got the impact. You've got a couple of cars completely destroyed, fires burning, and a bit of a sense of panic here amongst the people here. A lot of people running towards this spot, presumably to try and find out if anyone they knew had been hurt. We've not heard that there have been any casualties here, but you can see it's a pretty built-up residential neighborhood. And these Iranian missiles, most of them are getting shot down, but some get through. And some of these missiles, what happens is they break up in the sky and form these smaller cluster bombs that don't do as much damage when they fall, but they're still potentially deadly.
Israel's foreign minister has dismissed reports that the IDF is running short of ballistic missile interceptors. Gideon Saar spoke to reporters during a visit to the site of another Iranian missile strike near the town of Zarzir in the north of the country. He also touched on Israel's campaign in Lebanon, where the IDF has been striking targets linked to the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah. The latest figures from Lebanon show the human cost of that campaign. Health officials say Israeli strikes have killed more than 800 people since the start of the month. It was 826, and that figure has now risen to 850. In terms of displacement, the United Nations also says the fighting has forced more than 800,000 people to flee their homes. Gideon Saar denied reports that Israel and Lebanon were preparing to hold direct talks in the coming days.
Hezbollah is working accordingly to instructions from Tehran, not from Beirut. They are acting against the will of Lebanon and its citizens. If the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army want to change something, they should do something in order to stop the attacks being done by Hezbollah from Lebanese territory.
The most recent images coming in from Iran show the damage inflicted by US and Israeli bombardment. This was the scene early Sunday in a neighbourhood of Tehran where a police station was hit and some surrounding buildings were damaged. These pictures were filmed as part of a media tour organised by the Iranian government, but we've also been hearing directly from people inside the country. A man from Tehran said he disagreed with the attacks and told the BBC that Iran could be ruined if attacks continued at pace. Our correspondent Azadeh Moshiri has more.
Communications are very, very hard, but when you can get a glimpse, it gives you a bit of insight into what life is there. And while at the beginning Iranians had feelings that were mixed with hope and fear, right now they're very concerned about what kind of country they're going to be left with. One person talked to me about feeling like it will be, on the one hand, a lack of basic goods, inflation in the economy, and potentially unrest and bloodshed, as he put it, and that after all of this, they will still be left with a regime that they hope they'd never see again.
As the military campaign looks set to continue, what are the chances of a diplomatic way out of the conflict? The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran has never asked for a ceasefire. It follows an earlier claim by Donald Trump, who said the Iranian government appeared ready to make a deal, but in his words, the terms weren't good enough yet. Let's get more on this from our correspondent in Washington, Simi Jolo Osho. So, Simi, bring us up to date with what each side has been saying.
Yeah, well, President Donald Trump says Iran wants to make a deal, but that he's not ready to make a deal with Iran because it doesn't have terms that are good enough for him. He says that the terms need to be very solid, but he didn't expand on what very solid would look like. We know that one term President Trump would want in any deal with Iran is for the country to abandon any nuclear ambitions. On the other hand, you've got Iran's foreign minister who spoke to the BBC's US partner CBS News, saying that Iran never asked for a ceasefire and has not asked for negotiations. And he also said, why would Iran speak to the US? Because in the middle of negotiations, that's when the US struck Iran. He also claimed that 48 hours before the US struck Iran, Iran offered to dilute 440 kilos of its enriched uranium. He says right now nothing is on the table between the two countries and that Iran will continue to defend itself or continue fighting until President Trump concedes and says that this is an illegal war. But on the other hand, you've got President Trump who says that the US will continue hitting Iran very hard. He also mentioned potentially hitting more targets on Hague Island for fun, he said. It looks like a diplomatic breakthrough between these two countries currently appears really limited. There could have been some sort of indirect communication between the two countries, perhaps through Gulf intermediaries. But right now, both countries are clearly determined to continue exerting military pressure.
Simi Jalosho, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. And Paul, given what we've been hearing about the language on both sides, of the US and Iran, is there any room for diplomacy or de-escalation at all?
It doesn't feel like that at the moment. And I think a lot of the Western diplomatic efforts are probably focused around how to secure the Straits of Hormuz, because the thing that is worrying people from, all around the world is the long-term economic impacts of this crisis. And so that's why we're seeing governments talking about how, and even if it's possible to guarantee shipping through that narrow waterway at a time when the Iranians could, and there is no evidence at the moment that they have, but that they could make it impossible through the sowing of mines. At the moment, as you've heard from from Donald Trump and from the Iranians, there is no obvious sign that either side is looking for a diplomatic off-ramp at the moment. I think the Iranians feel that they still have cards to play, and judging by everything that we're hearing from the Americans and indeed the Israelis, they still feel that they've got some way to go with the military campaign.
And some of the countries that have been drawn into this, the Gulf countries, and many of them were mediators in the past, weren't they? Have they got any room to put pressure on either side in this?
Well, they will be trying. They will be trying to persuade both sides to look for that off ramp. I mean, the Omanis are absolutely furious because they felt that a deal was in the offing literally within hours of the attacks beginning. They felt that they had negotiated this deal whereby the Iranians would downgrade their enriched uranium, possibly then moving it outside of Iran. At the moment, Abbas Araghchi says all of that is under the rubble, and so that's not really an option at the moment. But they are furious, I think, at the launching of a war that they did not want to see. But they are also furious with Iran because they have seen a reaction from Iran which has included not just the attacks on American military targets up and down the Gulf, but also attacks on their own civilian infrastructure and, of course, their oil infrastructure. So they right now really feel that they are caught between two players who frankly are not working to their interests, but pursuing, this maximalist military objective instead.
And in the meantime, the cost of this to the global economy continues to go up. And you mentioned the effect of the Strait of Hormuz essentially being blocked. How far do you think this is going to go?
Well, I think, clearly the longer the conflict goes on, the more those impacts are rippling out across the global economy. And so that's why we are seeing this real focus now on trying to explore how the Strait of Hormuz might be opened. You've got the Europeans meeting tomorrow to discuss whether or not a mission that they've had in place in the Red Sea, dealing with similar threats from the Houthis in Yemen, whether that can be expanded in some way to include the Strait of Hormuz. You had the British government talking about sending maritime, maritime drone equipment. We've moved away from using ships as minesweepers. We're looking now at using drones, underwater drones, to detect and deal with mines. Lots of discussions, but frankly, you get the impression that here is something, a consequence of this war that was blindingly obvious. It was always going to happen, but for some reason, the Americans don't seem to have planned for it. You had Donald Trump saying only a short time ago, we don't need your ships, Britain. We don't, the war is already won. Now, within the last 24 hours, we've had him asking, ordering, requesting that America's allies, including Britain, send ships precisely